Hi guys, read along as I read aloud to you, and hopefully this will help you understand a little more what's going on. Misconceptions. After our investigation into the black box, you probably realized that sometimes a proposed model or explanation seems to work when upon closer inspection, it doesn't. One of the challenges scientists face is something called a misconception. Misconceptions are like misunderstandings. You think you get it, but you don't. Everyone has experienced this at some time in his or her life. In fact, misconceptions are often part of the learning process. Misconceptions happen for a variety of reasons. Sometimes a misconception is based on incomplete or wishful thinking. Others are passed on from one person to another year after year, the way urban legends or rumors are spread. Some misconceptions are widely held by large numbers of people, and some even show up in textbooks, on the internet, or on television. Avoiding misconceptions is really about making careful, detailed observations and then using logic and evidence to explain them. Consider these 3 common misconceptions. Number 1, people mistakenly believe that the seasons have something to do with how far away from the sun we are. 2, people mistakenly believe that the phases of the moon are caused by Earth's shadow falling on the moon. And 3, people mistakenly believe that eggs can balance on end only during the spring equinox. All of these ideas are wrong, but they are all caused by the same thing. They sound right, so people don't carefully look into the details and consider them. In order to understand the seasons, the phases of the moon, and the equinox, you have to understand how the sun, moon, and earth are arranged in space. You need to know how the earth and moon move as well. Misconceptions are pernicious. People don't let go of them easily. One of the things you need to do as a good science student is to be constantly aware of the potential for forming misconceptions. At the start of each unit, we will explore some of the more common misconceptions that people have about that topic. Check yourself when we do this to see if you have those ideas in your head too. If you make yourself aware of misconceptions, they are easier to remove from your brain. To help you understand the idea of misconceptions more deeply, we are going to read another excerpt from a book by Philip Plait. The book is called Bad Astronomy. The chapter we're going to read is called The Yoke's on You. Before we begin, you should ask yourself why Mr. Plait called his book Bad Astronomy, and why he named this chapter The Yoke's on You. You may not be able to guess correctly about this, but that's okay. What you want to do is engage your brain in the act of making a prediction. Good readers are always trying to predict what is coming next, and then they compare what they predicted to what actually happened. This process makes reading more active and therefore more meaningful. To help focus you before you read The Yoke's on You, we will use a tool called an anticipation guide. This guide will help you think about a few of the key ideas that will come up in the reading. You can cut and paste the guide into an active reading journal and complete it there. For you guys, that might be GoodNotes. Here's the anticipation guide. You should read the directions and then fill out the before reading side, either in GoodNotes, or if you want a paper copy, you can ask me for a paper copy. I have them. And, then once you're done with that, you can continue with this tutorial. The Yoke's on You, Egg Balancing and the Equinox, excerpted from Bad Astronomy by Philip Plait. Consider the humble chicken egg. Outside, its hard white calcium shell is mostly round and smooth. It might have small bumps on it, or even tiny ridges and waves, but its overall geometry is so well defined that we use the term egg-shaped when we see something similarly crafted. The very word ovoid comes from the Latin for egg. Inside, we have the white part of the egg. The technical term is albumin, and the yellow yolk. This goo is what is destined to become a chicken, if we let it. Usually we don't. Humans have all sorts of schemes planned for chicken eggs, from the simple act of cooking them to such bizarre practices as frying them on sidewalks to show how hot it is, and using them to decorate houses on Halloween night. But there's an even weirder ritual performed with the chicken egg. Every year, All across the United States and around the world, this ritual is performed at the beginning of the spring season. On or about March 21st, school children, news people, and ordinary citizens take a chicken egg and try to stand it on end. A non-scientific survey conducted by me, by asking audience members when I give a public talk and people I meet at parties or standing in the line at grocery stores, shows that about 1/2 of the population has either heard of this practice or tried it themselves. That's roughly 130 million people in America alone. So, it's certainly worth investigating. If you've watched this ritual, or have tried it yourself, you know that it takes incredible patience, care, and stamina. It also takes luck, a flat surface, and a sprinkling of bad astronomy. At first glance, you might not expect astronomy to play any great role here. However, like the cultural rites of ancient peoples, it's the timing that's important. This ritual is performed on the date of the spring equinox, which is the point in our orbit around the sun when we experience equal hours of day and night. Astronomers call the spring equinox the vernal equinox. The root of the word vernal means green, which has obvious links to springtime. To my mind, the idea of balancing an egg is as strange a way to celebrate the spring equinox as is dancing at the foot of Stonehenge, dressed as druids. So what are the details of egg standing exactly? It goes something like this. According to the legend, it's only possible to stand an egg on end and have it balance perfectly on the exact date of the spring equinox. Some people even claim that it must be done on the exact time of the equinox. If you try it at any other time, even minutes before or after, you'll fail. That's all there is to it. Seems simple, right? Every year, at the magical date, newscasters, usually TV weather people, since the date is important to climate, talk on the air about balancing eggs. A lot of schoolrooms, in an effort to perform a scientific experiment, also try to get the little egg upright. Sometimes the newscasters will go to the classroom to show the kids trying, and after a while, voila, someone gets an egg to stand. The cameraman is rushed over, and the beaming future scientist gets his or her face on TV that night, film at 11. Unfortunately, if the teacher doesn't go any further, the child's future as a scientist may be in some doubt. This hasn't really proven the legend one way or another. Let's take a closer look at it. We need to start by asking what should be an obvious question. Why would the vernal equinox be the only time you can do this? I have asked that of people who believe the legend to be true, and they make vague claims about gravity aligning just right on that special day. The earth, the egg, and the sun all line up just right to let the egg balance. But this can't be right. There is always some point on the surface of the earth, exactly between the center of the earth and the sun. It has nothing to do with any special time. And shouldn't the moon have some effect too? The moon's gravitational force on the earth is pretty large, so gravity is pretty influential. Yet, the moon plays no part at all in the legend. Obviously, the vernal equinox is not the root of the issue. Luckily, we don't have to rely totally on theory. The legend of vernal egg balancing makes a practical prediction that can be tested. Specifically, the prediction is, if an egg will stand only on the vernal equinox, then it will not stand at any other time. Once you think of it that way, the experimental verification is obvious. Try to stand an egg on end some other time. The vernal equinox is usually on March 21st or thereabouts every year. To test the theory, we need to try to upend an egg on some other day, a week, month, or even farther from the time of the equinox. The problem is, most people don't follow through with the experiment to its logical conclusion. They only try it on the equinox, and never on any other day. However, I've tested it myself. Of course you're skeptical, as you should be. Skepticism is an important scientific tool. But why take my word for it? Chances are it's not March 21st as you read this. Go find some eggs and give it a try. I'll wait. Finished? So, could you do it? Maybe not. It's not easy after all. You need patience, a steady hand, and a fairly strong desire to balance an egg. After I got these eggs balanced, I had trouble balancing anymore. My wife happened to come downstairs at that moment and asked me what the heck I was doing, and she quickly decided that it looked like fun. Actually, I think it was her competitive nature that drove her. She wanted to stand up more eggs than I did. She did. Actually, she had a hard time at first. I told her that I had heard it's easier to stand an egg if you shake it a little first, to help the yolk settle. She did, but pressed too hard on the shell. While she was shaking it, her thumb broke the shell, and she got glop all over the wall of our kitchen. I imagine we have the only house in the country where something like this could happen. Eventually, she was successful. She was the one who got the rest of the eggs to stand. We got 8 total from that one carton. Clearly, her hands are steadier than mine. Once, when scheduled to give a public talk about bat astronomy at the Berkshire Museum of Natural Science in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, I arrived late due to an ice storm. I had to change my clothes quickly and literally run to the auditorium. When I arrived, I was out of breath and my hands were shaking a little from the stress and excitement. I usually start off my lecture by balancing an egg, but because I was shaking a little, I had a very hard time of it. I struggled with the eggs all during the time the lecture series curator was introducing me. And by some sort of miracle, I got it balanced just as he finished announcing my name. To this day, it's the loudest and most pleasing ovation I have ever received. The lesson here is that if you are patient and careful, you can usually get 1 or 2 eggs from a carton to stand. Of course, you can also cheat. If you sprinkle salt on the table first, it will support the egg. Then you gently blow on the remaining salt so that it gets swept away. The salt holding up the egg is almost invisible and will never be seen from a distance. I, however, would never do something like this. Honest. Actually, over the years, I've become pretty good at balancing eggs with no tricks. Practice makes perfect. Science and reason are good tools to have in the battle against misconceptions. But in most cases, they take a back seat to history and tradition. The egg balancing legend has been around for a while and is fairly well settled in the American culture. I get lots of email from people about standing eggs on end, especially around the middle of March, shortly before the equinox. A lot of it is from people who think I am dead wrong. Of course it's all about the equinox, they tell me. Everyone says so. Then they tried it on the day of the equinox for themselves, and it worked. The egg stood. Of course it did, I tell them. It'll stand on any other day as well, which they can prove to themselves if they just try it. They haven't followed through with their experiment, and they convince themselves they are right when the evidence isn't all in. They rely on word of mouth for what they believe, and that isn't a very strong chain of support. Just because someone says it's so doesn't make it so. Who knows from where he or she first heard it? In this case, we can find out. Most urban legends in America, like this one, have origins that are lost in the distant history of repeated tellings. However, happily, this one has a traceable and very specific origin: Life magazine. As reported by renowned skeptic Martin Gardner in the May-June 1996 issue of the wonderfully rational magazine Skeptical Inquirer, the legend was born when, in the March 19, 1945 issue of Life, Annalee Jacoby wrote about a Chinese ritual. In China, the first day of spring is called Li Chun, and they reckon it to be roughly 6 weeks before the vernal equinox. In most countries, the equinoxes and solstices do not mark the beginning of seasons. Instead, they're actually the midpoints. Since a season is 3 months or 12 weeks long, these countries believe that the actual first day of spring is 6 weeks before the equinox. The Chinese legend has an uncertain origin, according to Mr. Gardner, although it is spread through old books about Chinese rituals. In 1945, a large number of people turned up in the city of Chongqing to balance eggs, and it was this event that Miss Jacoby reported to Life. Evidently, the United Press picked up the story and promptly sent it out to a large number of venues. A legend was born. Interestingly, Miss Jacoby reported that balancing an egg was done on the first day of spring, yet it was never said, or else it was conveniently forgotten, that the first day of spring in China was a month and a half before the first day of spring as recognized by Americans. This inconvenient fact should have put a wet blanket on the proceedings. But somehow, That never slowed anything down. In 1983, the legend got perhaps its most famous publicity. Donna Hennis, a self-proclaimed artist and ritual maker, gathered about 100 people in New York City to publicly stand eggs up at the exact moment of the vernal equinox on March 20th, 1983. This event was covered by the New Yorker magazine, and a story about it appeared in its April 4th, 1983 issue, describing how Miss Hennis handed out eggs to the onlookers, making them promise not to stand any up before the appointed time. Around 11:39 p.m., she upended an egg and announced, "Spring is here." Everyone in the crowd, us included, got busy balancing eggs. The New Yorker said excitedly, "Honest to God, it works." The unnamed reporter was not so convinced, however, as to swallow this line whole. 2 days after the equinox, the reporter brought a dozen eggs to the same place where the ritual had occurred. For 20 minutes, the reporter tried to balance the eggs, but didn't get a single one to stand on its end. The reporter admits the failure may have been psychological. The trouble may have been that we didn't want the egg to balance, that we wished to see Donna Hennis to be proved right. This, despite the reporter having asked several physicists about the legend and having all of them say they couldn't think of why it should work. I find it ironic and faintly troubling that one of those physicists said that water swirls down the wash basin drain one way in the northern hemisphere and the other way in the southern hemisphere. This is another astronomy-based urban legend, and it's not true. Mrs. Hennis went on to more balancing rituals, too. The year after the 1983 demonstration, more than 5,000 people showed up at the World Trade Center to participate in an egg balancing. Even the New York Times was fooled. 4 years later, on March 19, 1988, they published an editorial with the headline, "It's spring, go balance an egg." 2 days later, the Times ran a picture of people standing eggs up once again at the World Trade Center. So this legend seems to spread easily. If the illustrious New York Times can help it along, the legend may very well be unstoppable. Still, stoppable or not, I cannot let something like this get past me so easily. In an effort to stem the tide, just before the vernal equinox of 1998, I called a local TV station and chatted with the weatherman about the egg standing. He had never heard of it, but was excited because they like to have little quizzes before the forecast, and this was a good topic for the news on the equinox. So he asked the rest of the news team, composed of 2 anchors and a sportscaster, if an egg could stand only on the equinox. Who do you think got it right? To my surprise, the sportscaster figured the equinox had nothing to do with it, while the 2 news anchors both guessed it did. It's funny, too. The anchors never did get their eggs to stand up, while the sportscaster did. A triumph for science. It may simply be that our common sense, something short and round like an egg can't stand on end, and poor recall, who can remember exactly why we have seasons, combine to reinforce the legend. Worse, it gets positive feedback from the newscasts every year. Not every TV news station is as open-minded as the one I called. Imagine the real schoolroom scene described at the beginning of this chapter. We have 30 or so kids and one rushed teacher going from student to student, giving encouragement. Suddenly, a child gets an egg to stand. At the same time, 29 other kids don't get theirs to stand. Who gets on TV? Right. It's no fun to show the ones who didn't get it. However, science isn't just about showing when you're right. It's also about showing when you're wrong. Science is about asking why, and why not this way? Sometimes you need to think around the problem. For example, if the spring equinox is special, isn't the autumnal one special too? They are both basically the same, yet you never hear about people trying to stand eggs on end in September. Even better, the seasons are opposite in the northern and southern hemispheres. When it's spring in one, it's fall in the other, and vice versa. But people usually don't think of these things. It's too easy to simply accept what you're told. This is extraordinarily dangerous. If you just assume, without thinking critically, that someone is right, you may be voting for the wrong politician, or accepting an idea that has a bad foundation, or buying a used car that might kill you. Science is a way of distinguishing good data from bad. Practicing science is wonderful. It makes you think about things, and thinking is one of the best things you can do. The end.